Hello. So I have been trying to get on live for the last 20 minutes, but Facebook has not been my friend and wouldn't let me. So apologies for those of you that showed up at 3:30. My name is Janine, and this is Anaya, who is my sidekick because she didn't want to nap. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Janine Brand. I am the founder of Lightbox Coaching, where I help ambitious women to build careers that they love whilst raising little people. And I'm also a lawyer, a corporate commercial lawyer, and I am a mummy to two. So this little one and also my son. So I help women to build careers that they love after they have a baby. So sometimes that means them going back to their previous career, sometimes that means them having a career shift, and sometimes that means them starting their own business. So I recently had some queries from a few people around their contracts and questions around whether or not their contracts in their business are covering them sufficiently. And it got me thinking that a lot of people, hi Danielle, it got me thinking that a lot of people probably have the same questions around their contracts. And so that's why I'm here today. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about how you can be minimizing legal risk in your business. And Anaya wants to talk too. So I'm not going to be here for long, but I'm going to talk to you about three things. So firstly, why you need a contract. Secondly, what you need to make sure is in your contract. And thirdly, the two clauses that are really important that you get right in your contract. So let's start off with, yes, it worked, Danielle, we got on. So let's start off with why you need a contract. So it might seem obvious, but I'm surprised by how many people don't actually have contracts and that they enter into commercial relationships without actually having contracts sorted out. So the reason why you need contracts is so that everything in terms of the commercial relationship between you and your client is crystal clear. So everybody knows where they stand, and that reduces the scope for dispute and problems later on down the line. So it's all well and good saying, well, I don't think things are going to go wrong and me and this person have a great relationship, it should be fine, but that's not good enough. You want to make sure that you have things in writing. So even if you don't have a formalized contract, having something written down which shows the intention of both of you is really going to help later on down the line. So I want to, I think I'm going to stand because she's better when I stand. So I want to give you an illustration because I think that might help to get you to realize why it is so important. So imagine you are a designer and you are a graphic designer. You've just started business and you sent an email out to friends to tell them that you were in business, and they said great, and they sent you a referral and you got a paying client. So that person came to you, let's say the designer's name's Mary. So Mary got a client who came to her. She told her what she wanted in terms of a design, and Mary said, yeah, that's great, I can help you. She sent her a PayPal link, and then the client paid via PayPal, and Mary said, right, as soon as I receive that payment, I'm going to make a start on your contract. I'm going to make a start on your design. So Mary goes off, she's really excited, she's got her first client, and she makes a start. She makes a start based on what the client said they would need. And she does the design and she sends it to the client. The client comes back and says, yeah, that isn't really what I had in mind. So Mary says, oh, okay, well, what should we do? The client says, well, can you go back to the drawing board and can you just tweak it a little bit? So Mary goes back, she tweaks it, she goes back to the client with the next design, and the client says, it's still not quite right, it's not quite what I had in mind. So now Mary's getting a bit frustrated because she has other people inquiring about her services and she has other potentially bigger projects that she'd like to move on to, but she can't because she's working on this for this client. So she goes back a third time. This time the client says, okay, yeah, this is more along the lines of what I want. So they agree that that design can be acceptable. So they get to the point where she's delivered to the client, but she's frustrated. She spent a lot more time than she anticipated. So what initially seemed as though it was going to be a good project that was paying her well doesn't turn out to be, because she spent a lot more time on it than she expected to spend on it. And so then she is out of pocket because she spent more time which she could have been spending on more projects, and the client is frustrated because she thinks that Mary didn't really get her or didn't really understand what she wanted, and so the client's unlikely to then recommend her to other people. So that situation could be a common one. It could be one that occurs for people when they haven't got any kind of contract in place, or they haven't made specific arrangements with each other and agreed specifics around the job spec, around the timing, around how many revisions are acceptable, etc. So that could have all been avoided if Mary had set out a contract, or if not a contract, if she had written down with the client exactly what the job spec is for the design and what the expectation was around how many revisions could be made. So that just gives you one example of where it could go wrong if you haven't got anything in place and you just take money and then you just get going with providing the service. So definitely need a contract, and any lawyer is going to tell you that you do need a contract. And the other thing to say, though, is if you've got a contract, you need to make sure that the contract that you've got is working for you. So I know that a lot of people will approach it by downloading a contract, because at the beginning of your business, you've got so many things to think about. Marketing, you've got to think about PR, you've got to think about your finances. There's so many things, and so the legals often get pushed to the back burner. So you might just say, okay, let me just download a client agreement and this should be good enough for my business. That's okay. However, I would really urge you to make sure that you're looking at the template that you're using in line with your business and what you actually do in your business, to make sure that you know that the contract is sufficient for what you do. So really think about, what do I do in my business? What are my procedures? How am I going to be delivering this service? And if it's a product, how am I going to be delivering the product? Just making sure that in your contract and in your terms and conditions, you're being really clear about what it is you do, how you're going to deliver it, and what the client can expect. So if you are downloading and you are using a template, make sure that you are doing that. And there are many clauses that can be in a contract. A contract can be 50 pages long, it can be 2 pages long, but if you're looking for a simple service agreement, you're going to want to make sure you've got the parties clearly set out, you have your services set out, you have the price that you're paying, you have the circumstances around what happens if someone's not happy, what's the refund policy, is there a refund policy. You also want to talk about what they can expect in terms of the timeframes for delivery. You want to make sure you're talking about confidentiality. You have a clause in there that covers confidentiality and what happens there. Intellectual property also, who owns the rights to any designs, if it's a design work, or are you transferring any intellectual property, that should be covered off. And those are some of the main ones. And I just want to touch on the 2 clauses that you really need to make sure are very, very clear in your contract, especially if you're in the online space. So I touched on your services, but in your services clause, do make sure that you're setting out what you are going to be doing for the client, but also what you're not going to be doing. So sometimes, depending on what you do, you could say to somebody, I'm going to provide you with web design, or I'm going to provide you with personal training, whatever it is that you do. And people might have an assumption around what is included in that. So if you just put in your contract, I'm going to provide you with web design, and in that person's mind, that means web design and also building the website and coding the website for them. When you just provide the design and not the coding, they're going to think that, well, aren't you doing that bit as well? And if you haven't had the discussion, it can turn into a tricky conversation, or it could turn into the client feeling like they're not getting what you promised, when actually you didn't promise that in the first place. So in that services clause, really set out what you're doing and what you're not doing. And I'd urge any coaches as well, if you're a business coach, for example, client's going to think they're going to come to you and then you're going to help them to build their business and get a certain amount of profits, but that you should never be promising something that you don't have control over. So they're only going to get results if they do the work. So you can't guarantee them that they're going to reach a certain revenue goal. So in your contract, you want to be making super duper clear that you're doing this for them, but you are not promising anything, or you are excluding certain services that they might think go along with the business coaching. So those are just a few examples where you need to really think about carving out what you're not promising, so everybody's on the same page, so everybody's super duper clear about where you're going and what you're doing in the commercial relationship. And the other clause that is super duper important, especially for online entrepreneurs who work with clients in various jurisdictions, is your governing law and your jurisdiction clause. So those are two clauses that are generally found at the bottom of a contract. They're generally found in what we call the boilerplate terms, and they can get skipped over by lawyers and especially non-lawyers, but those clauses are really important. So the governing law clause is the clause that says whose law is going to govern this relationship. So which country's law is going to govern it. So if you are in the States and you have a client in the UK, if the governing law clause is saying, if the governing law clause says that it is governed by UK law, then if there is any dispute, we're going to be looking at UK law to see what the law says and then how the dispute can be settled. So if you are not based in that jurisdiction, that would mean you would have to then instruct a lawyer in that jurisdiction. Anaya's not cooperating with mummy right now. You would have to instruct a lawyer in that jurisdiction. So what you want to make sure is that your jurisdiction clause reflects where you are. You want to make sure that if you're in the States, you have a jurisdiction clause that reflects that you're in the States and the specific state that you're in, because in the States you have different laws for each of the states. So make sure that you have the right jurisdiction governing your contract. And then the second thing is make sure you have the right governing law in governing your contract. And then the jurisdiction is which courts will hear the dispute. So if it does go to court, which courts in which country will hear the dispute. So generally the governing law and the jurisdiction clause match in terms of the country, but just make sure that that reflects where you are, because then that's going to minimize your costs. If it ever does go down to having to go to court and there being a claim brought against you, you want to make sure that you're minimizing any legal costs as much as possible. So those are things that you really need to look at. So I hope that this has been useful. It's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour through just a few minutes. I just wanted to jump on, especially because this little lady is not letting me speak to you for longer. But the key thing to remember is the legals don't have to be scary. It's just all about setting everything up so everybody knows where they stand, and there's no room for ambiguity, or there's no room for confusion and misinterpretation. So having everything set out super duper clear is going to stand you in good stead and reduce the risk of there being any problems and any disputes. And I must say, because I'm a lawyer, that this isn't me giving you legal advice, disclaimer. I'm just giving you some guidance around how you can set yourself up. And so I hope that's useful, and go now, have a look at your contract and just make sure that the governing law clause is right, and make sure that your services are set out clearly and that you are communicating with your customers what you will be doing for them and also what you won't be doing for them, so that there isn't any confusion. Hope that's useful, and I should speak to you again soon. You can always ask me a question or leave me a comment if you have any, if you're watching this in the replay. And this little one, we're going to say bye now because she's not happy. Bye.